Welcome back, my family. Before we jump into today's horror stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. Your comments and likes really help YouTube push our video and show you even more stories. I'd also love to know, where are you watching from and what time is it there? Drop your answers and suggestions in the comments, and who knows, I might give you a shout out in the next video. Thank you for being here and for all your amazing support. I've worn the Ranger badge at New River Gorge for nearly 20 years. You get used to the usual emergencies: lost hikers, snake bites, drunks falling into the river on a Saturday night. But there's nothing that can prepare you for the sound of a human body being pulled apart under the earth. That's what started it for me. It was early October when the gorge fills with fog so thick you can lose sight of your own boots. Reports have been trickling in for weeks. Stone cairns turning up on trails where no hikers had been, stacked waist-high with a strange symmetry, almost ceremonial. At first, we blamed board campers or college kids from Fayetteville. Then came the missing pets from nearby towns, and the deer carcasses dragged half into the water like something had been interrupted. The first human death was Emily Nagel, a grad student from Marshall University who came out to survey bat populations in the abandoned mine tunnels. She was bright-eyed, polite, and brought homemade cookies for the staff. I walked her down to Devil's Creek myself, pointed out the trail spurs, and reminded her to radio every evening. She nodded like a soldier. 3 days later, fishermen found her body on the creek bank. Her torso was intact. Her head was gone. The coroner said the wound was smooth, almost surgical, as if something with a jaw wider than her shoulders had taken her in one bite. The sheriff wanted to call it a bear attack, but even a black bear leaves ragged tearing, and we'd have found the skull. We didn't. I couldn't leave it at that. Rangers don't have the luxury of leaving things alone. Not when hikers keep vanishing and families look to you for answers. So I started digging. At the mouth of an old mine shaft sealed in the 1930s, I found another cairn. 5 stones stacked perfectly, each smeared with something slick that smelled of copper. The air spilling out of the shaft was damp and warm like breath. I leaned close and thought I heard movement, the slow pull of something huge shifting through water. 2 nights later, my fellow Ranger Jess didn't show for shift change. Her truck was parked crooked at the trailhead, engine still warm. She'd taken a flashlight and her sidearm, but nothing else. My stomach went hollow. I grabbed flares, rope, and a backup radio and followed the wet boot prints into the shaft. The tunnel angled down sharply, air growing wetter, the stone walls sweating. My light caught the outlines of something gelatinous coating the rocks. It shimmered, a mucus layer, and within it shapes twitched, half-digested rabbits, frogs, even a raccoon. My boots squelched in slime. Deeper still, the shaft opened into a flooded cavern. The water glowed faintly, full of suspended particles, and at the far end hung shapes. People, wrapped chest to toe in translucent cocoons attached to the walls. Their eyes rolled weakly behind the film. Jess was there, still alive, her mouth open in a soundless scream. Then I saw it. It rose from the pool like a nightmare, a body too long to count, skin mottled gray and slick. Its head was a warped parody of a salamander's, wide, flat, with lidless eyes and a jaw that unhinged farther than physics should allow. I understood then what we were dealing with. An Appalachian hellbender, mutated beyond recognition, trapped underground for decades and fed by the poison streams of old coal mines. Time and isolation had twisted it into something new, something that fed not just to eat, but to collect. It moved with a terrible slowness, as if conserving strength, but when its head tilted toward me, the ripple it made in the water slapped my chest. My flare gun shook in my hand. I aimed at the water and fired. The cavern exploded in red light, the hiss of burning phosphorus filling the air. The thing shrieked, a bubbling roar that vibrated through the stone. The cocoon shuddered. I cut Jess free with my knife, dragging her as the monster flailed, its bulk slamming into the cavern walls. Chunks of rock rained down. Another flare went into the roof. The tunnel groaned. We ran, water up to our knees, slime clutching at our boots. Behind us came a crash like the world folding. The ceiling collapsed, blocking the cavern. The flare smoke and dust closed the shaft in a choking curtain. Outside, the night air felt unreal, too clean. Jess was barely conscious, whispering nonsense about the stone stacks and the deep singing. She survived, but she doesn't speak of what she saw. In the days that followed, we reported it officially as a mine collapse caused by structural weakness. No mention of what lived down there, no photos of the cocoons. The sheriff accepted it, grateful to close the case. But know what I saw? That wasn't the only mine shaft in these mountains. The old coal veins laced through the gorge like arteries, most uncharted, most forgotten. If one creature grew in the dark, why not more? I patrol Devil's Creek less now, but sometimes when fog hugs the water, I swear I hear it again. That slow, bubbling roar under the earth, waiting for the rock to shift, waiting to feed. And the cairns keep coming back. Taller now, sharper, almost like markers on a map only the creature can read. A quick announcement here. If you're still here and enjoying these stories but haven't subscribed yet, please take a second to do so. Drop a comment too. It really helps push the video out to more people. Your support means everything, and it truly makes my day. I've been Chief Ranger at Howling Pines National Forest for over a decade. The woods here run deep, pines thick enough to block the sun, marshes that steam even in winter, and trails older than memory. Locals whisper about the dogman, a wolf that walks upright, but most of us laughed it off as campfire talk. I laughed too, until the disappearances began. 12 people gone in 3 months. Families torn apart. Not hikers or tourists, but locals, descendants of men whose names I remembered from the archives, old clippings about hunters claiming they'd killed the beast back in 1940s and 50s. Each missing person carried that bloodline. That was too much to be chance. The first case was a logger named Henderson. His grandfather had supposedly shot the dogman in 1951. The body was never recovered, but the story lived on in yellowed newspapers. Henderson went missing just after midnight, his truck still running on the service road. We found his boot prints leading into the swamp, and beside them, something else, paw prints. Not bear, not wolf, larger, too large, and they ran alongside his tracks, not chasing, not fleeing, escorting. By the third disappearance, I knew I had to stop writing unresolved in my reports. I started spending nights in the tower, watching the tree line with binoculars, listening to the forest breathe. One night, fog poured in thick as milk. Around 2 in the morning, a howl rose from the valley. Not coyote, not wolf. It had the pitch of a man's scream, layered with something feral, rolling through the pines in waves. My blood went cold. The howl answered itself. First one voice, then another, then a dozen. A pack. I followed the sound with a rifle and a radio, my boots sinking into moss. The deeper I went, the more wrong it felt. The trees pressed close. The fog seemed to move against the wind, curling around me like it had intention. Then I found them. A circle of stones at the edge of a clearing, blackened with soot. Char bones lay inside. Around the circle were carvings in the dirt, claw marks that weren't random. They formed patterns, almost runes. I bent close, tracing them with my eyes. And then I heard it. My name, spoken in a guttural rasp behind me. I swung my light. At the far edge of the clearing stood a figure. 7 feet tall at least, legs bent wrong, shoulders like a bull's, fur slick with mist. The head was wolf, yes, but the eyes, those were human. And it smiled. Chief Ranger, it said, the words broken but clear. I froze. My radio crackled uselessly. You protect forest, it rumbled. We protect it too, long before you. It stepped into the light, and I saw scars crossing its chest, puckered bullet wounds that looked decades old. Old enough to be from the rifles carried by those hunters in the black and white photos. My gut clenched. You kill us, it growled. But curse was not kill. Curse was gift. We wait. We choose. Behind it, more shapes emerged. Not all full creatures. Some are mid-change, their bodies warped, jaws lengthened, spines arched. Their eyes were wide, frightened, but their movements matched the leaders. My mind broke on the realization. These were the missing. The 12. The leader raised its muzzle. We do not take for revenge. We take for blood. Descendants of those who first bound us. Their flesh remembers. Their bones answer. They become pack. The words hit harder than claws. This wasn't some rogue predator. It was a legacy. The dogman wasn't one monster, but a curse written into the forest itself, passed from one generation to another. Why tell me this? I asked, my voice cracking. Because you choose now, it said. Stand against us and vanish. Stand with us and remain. The pack closed in. I saw faces I recognized. Henderson, the logger. Ellie Markham, the college student who'd gone missing last month. Their eyes glowed with sorrow and hunger, but none cried for help. They were already changed. I raised my rifle, but my arms shook. What would bullets do against something older than memory? What would killing one matter if the curse simply moved to another? The leader tilted its head. You guard this forest with laws. We guard with blood. It is same duty, same vow. And then it showed me. A vision, not with eyes, but with something deeper. I saw hunters with torches in the 1800s, burning groves, slaughtering wolves, desecrating sacred land. I saw shamans of the old tribes carving runes into stone, binding spirit to body, creating guardians that could never die, only pass into new forms. The dogman was never meant to be monster. It was meant to be protector, but humans had twisted it with bullets and fear. The vision faded. I was back in the clearing, my rifle useless in my hands. The leader knelt before me, its massive paw pressing into the dirt. Choose, it said. The forest around me breathed, waiting, and I knew. If I said no, I'd vanish like the rest. My name added to the list. My family told a lie about drowning or running away. If I said yes, I'd never be human again. But the forest would have its guardians. I lowered the rifle. My throat worked. Yes. The pack surged forward, not in violence, but in embrace. Claws pressed my skin. Fur brushed my face. Teeth grazed my arms. The leader bit into my shoulder, not to kill, but to mark. Pain roared through me, white hot, spreading like wildfire. My bones cracked. My vision sharpened. The night filled with scents I'd never noticed. Sap, moss, blood, rain on stone. I fell, and when I stood again, the world looked different. The curse, or the gift, had taken me. My hands were no longer mine. My voice, when I tried to scream, came out as a howl that shook the valley. And the pack howled back, answering me. In the days since, no more disappearances have been reported. Families rest easier. The sheriff shrugs off the missing as cold cases gone stale. The forest seems calmer, quieter, as if watched over. Because it is. I still wear the ranger badge. Still walk the trails, still sign the logs, still warn tourists about bears and storms. But when the fog rises and the howls echo through howling pines, I no longer fear them. I am one of them. I am guardian now, and the forest is safe. Kia Lake Preserve isn't on many maps. It sits by itself in the far north of Idaho, a cold bowl of water surrounded by black firs and limestone ridges that look like broken teeth. In fall, the air gets thin and clean, and the nights feel older than the clocks. I've been a ranger for 12 years, rotating across different parks, but Kia is different. We only staff it 2 months at a time because the place gets inside your head. People joke it's the silence. I know better. It isn't silent. It's listening. I took the rotation in late September. The road, it was a narrow ribbon of gravel, the color of bone. The lake sat so still it looked like a sheet of iron, not water. The station was a one-room cabin with a radio, a cot, a logbook, and a wall map dotted with old mine symbols. Years ago, contractors came through to seal open shafts with steel grates and, when needed, demolition charges. A locked orange case in the maintenance shed held 2 charges we hadn't used. I signed them in, checked the fuses, and locked the case again. I didn't think about them after that. Not until the end. On my second night, I heard it. A scream across the water. It snapped me out of a light doze like a hand on the shoulder. Not a cougar. Cougars sound like something being murdered, a ripping sound. This was different, thin, wet, and layered like 2 voices try to share one throat. I stepped out with my flashlight and let the beam crawl the lake. The wind pushed a line of ripples toward the far shore and died. No movement, no second scream. I wrote it in the log because that's what we do when we can't do anything else. The next morning, the south shoreline turned up something I'd never seen. Not trash, not driftwood. On a bed of wet moss sat 3 trout, heads together, tails fanned outward, their eyes bright as marbles. They hadn't been eaten. They were arranged. A ring of river stones circled them. The stones were powdery, like they'd been rubbed with chalk. The whole thing looked like a sign left for someone who could read it. I took photos and moved the fish back into the lake. The bodies sank, then spun, caught in a cold bow current I couldn't feel from shore. 2 days later, a family checked in at the trailhead kiosk, the Hendersons. Middle-aged couple, 2 kids, boy maybe 10, girl maybe 8. They were from Spokane and asked about the White Ledge Trail, the one that hugs the southeast ridge and looks down at the lake like a balcony. I gave them the standard talk. Sign in, sign out, 3 blasts on the rescue whistle if you're lost. It's getting dark early. The kids tested their whistles in the parking lot. Short burst, 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 high and proud. The sound made the crows lift. They signed out for a 3-hour hike at noon. At dusk, their car was still there. Protocol is a shape you step into so your fear has something to wear. I radioed dispatch, logged a delayed return, and gave the weather. Dropping temperatures, patchy fog. I left a bright note under their wiper. Check in at Ranger Station, and took the South Trail with a headlamp and a canteen of coffee. The forest swallowed the beam in 10 feet. Needles under my boots. My breath visible. 100 yards in, I found another arrangement. Not fish this time. A squirrel, splayed on a stump, arms crossed over its chest, the tail braided, into a neat rope that curled into its teeth. This one I didn't touch. I took pictures and stepped carefully around the stump. The kid in me wanted to say a prayer. The ranger in me didn't feed anything I didn't understand. I picked up the Henderson's boot prints near a switchback, 2 adult pairs, too small. The boy dragged his right foot a little. 10 minutes later, I found the girl's blue hair caught on a low branch. The trail bent north, then dove toward the old mine road, the one on the map with a big X through the shaft symbol. Sealed. My light swept a sign lying face down in the weeds. When I lifted it, the back of the board was scraped clean as if something had clawed at the wood, not to open it, but to wipe it. I heard the whistles then. 3 short blasts, airy and weak somewhere below the ridge. I shouted my name, my position the way back. Hold your position, Do not move. Answer me with whistles. A reply came, 3 blasts closer. I felt that stupid wash of relief you get when your head tells you a problem is solved. I moved toward it, marking my path with flagging tape on branches. The sound led me down a wash scarred with boot tracks and something else. Long smears as if a heavy sack had been dragged, but no sack marks, no rope. My light caught a hole in the hill, a black mouth lined with stones. The old mine shaft, the grate that should have sealed it, lay on the ground like a rib cage pried open. The bolts were snapped, not cut. The ends shone silver in my beam, fresh breaks. Inside, the air tasted like pennies. Water ticked somewhere, regular as a clock. I called out and got a voice back immediately. Not whistles. Words. Sir, we're here. The voice was the father's. Calm, like he was at a counter ordering food. It came from deeper in, bouncing off the walls. I aimed my light into the shaft and took 3 steps, then stopped. Something had drawn white lines in radiating arcs on the floor, circles inside circles, chalk dust puddled in cracks. It looked like tide rings. Don't step in. I went sideways along the wall and squeezed past where the circles ended. I followed my own rules. Keep the exit in your mind. Keep hands on the right wall. Count your steps. The shaft sloped and then widened. A drip, drip, drip somewhere. The smell thickened into a spongy, rot smell like the underbelly of old piers. Sir, over here. The mother this time. Breathless. So close it felt like I could put a hand out and touch her shoulder. My light hit a tangle of roots hanging from the ceiling, wet and white like bone fingers. Between them I saw it. A face. Not floating. Hung on a peg driven into the rock. A human face flattened out like a glove turned inside out. The skin had dried a little around the cheeks and tightened. The hair was still attached. The eyes were gone. The mouth was a smooth oval. Beneath it, something pale crouched in the dark, wet shoulders heaving slow. Its head lifted and the face on the peg twitched as if tugged by a string. Sir, it said in the father's voice. The sound didn't come from the face. It came from the pale thing beneath it. The voice was almost perfect, like a recording played through deep water. I backed away, boot heels scraping stone. The thing cocked its head too far to the side, as if learning the motion of necks, and it spoke again in the girl's voice. Yelp. The second syllable rose like a question someone else had taught it. I raised my light. More shapes moved. They weren't white. They were the color of damp limestone. Long limbs, a sheen like the inside of a fish. Their eyes reflected dull, deep, as if set farther back than ours. Gills fluttered along their throats, opening and closing with a sound like paper torn slowly. Some had strips of clothes draped over them like decoration. One wore a shirt upside down, the sleeves tied behind its neck like a child's cape. I took a step and my boot struck iron. Cages, 6 of them, bolted to the floor with rebar sunk into cement. In 2, people huddled, hands over faces blinking against my light. The Hendersons were in a far cage, all 4, pressed to the bars, eyes huge. The father mouthed something like a prayer. The mother shook her head once, a fierce, tiny motion. No, 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 and tapped the lock with her fingers as if saying, keep quiet. Between the cages stood a rack made of lashed willow. Hanging from it were objects, fishtails sewn to deer hide, bundles of teeth tied with sinew, bowls of chalky paste. The paste smelled like lake mud. In one tilted bowl lay something like a needle carved from bone. The pale creatures took turns dipping their long fingers into the paste and smearing it onto their own throats and the mouths of the captives. The captives whimpered, then went slack, breathing shallowly. The creatures threaded the bone needle through a strip of skin they'd cut along a captive's jawline and pulled, not to hurt, but as if fitting a mask. I had a gun, a state-issue sidearm for bears and desperate people. I had a flare gun. I also had common sense, which told me firing either might bring the ceiling down. But common sense had not prepared me for what I was seeing. If I did nothing, the Hendersons were done. If I acted, I had maybe one chance. "Back up," I whispered, the father's eyes fixed on mine. I pointed at him, then at the children, then at the mother, then at the floor by the door. I held up 3 fingers, then 2, then 1, and palmed the flare gun. The first shot lit the chamber like bad daylight. The creature under the hanging face flinched and hissed, not from pain, but from the light. A flare is a small sun. Shadows leaped 3 ways at once. I fired the second flare into the willow rack. The last wood whooshed into flame, and a sticky smoke rolled low and thick. The pale shapes drew back, gills fluttering like fans. I drew the pistol and put 2 rounds into the lock on the Henderson's cage. The steel spat fragments, and the bar dropped crooked. The father kicked it, and the door gave. We ran. Not far. The shaft seemed longer going out than it had coming in. Behind us, voices chased us, 100 human sounds uncurling out of wet throats. "Wait! Don't! This way!" The creature's mixed tones spliced them. A man sobbed in my father's voice, real as the day he'd called me from a hospital bed. A child laughed like a wind-up toy. A voice I didn't recognize sang a lullaby in a language older than my English. The sound pulled at the inside of my head, old and soft as stories around a fire. The boy stumbled. I lifted him and kept us moving. The girl slipped and went hands first into chalk dust, leaving clean finger stripes in the floor rings. The things behind us saw that and hissed a sound like a pond freezing. We made the mouth of a shaft, and the cold night air hit me like water. The father grabbed the boy, and the mother took the girl, and we ran down the mine road toward the lake. I heard the creatures come to the threshold and stop. They didn't like the open air. They didn't like the dry. For a heartbeat, I let myself believe we had bought more than a head start. The father looked back. "What are they?" he asked, breathing torn and high. I should have said I didn't know. That would have been the kind answer. But the truth had been growing in me for years, seeded by stories told at trainings, by yellowed reports, by lunch with a retired ranger who told me to be careful with the caves. A story of healers who had walked into the earth when the old wars came, trying to hide power from men who would misuse it. A story of medicine men who went below the water to keep their voices safe and came out different and then stopped coming out at all. "Old," I said. "Too old." We reached the maintenance shed by the trailhead. I unlocked the door with shaking hands. The orange case waited in the corner where I'd left it. I looked at the lake, black and quiet as deep space. If the creatures had other exits, sinkholes, vents, we were no safer here than in the mine. But I had one chance to buy time. "I need you to run to the station," I said. "Straight trail, 1 mile. There's a radio. Call for evac. Lock the door." "What about you?" the mother asked. "I'll be behind you." I lied. They ran. I took the charges and the fuses and the detonator and jogged back to the shaft. The night had woken. Frogs called, a thin glassy chime, and the ridge threw back echoes shaped like answers. The grate lay where it had fallen. I propped in the mouth a loose jaw. Inside, I heard movement, a slick slide, 1,000 fingertips on stone. I set the charges in the upper corners where the rock looked cracked already. The fuse cord felt like a cold snake in my hand. I pushed the orange case behind a boulder and unspooled wire. The white rings on the floor seemed to glow on their own now, a tide map written in another grammar. A voice spoke from the dark in a soft, steady chant. Not English, but I understood the meaning because understanding wasn't in language, it was in bones. The voice talked of binding and unbinding, of burrows under lakes, of hunger as old as thunder. One of them came to the threshold. It didn't cross. It raised a hand and moved its long fingers in a pattern that felt like a question. It wore something on its chest, leather thongs that held a disc carved from riverstone. Symbols cut into it looked like pictographs I'd seen in a book. Hands, spirals, a man with a fishtail. The creature touched the disc and made a sound like my name, except I hadn't given it. My light washed its face, and I saw skin stretched across its cheeks that wasn't its own. Human, fit carefully, sewn at the jaw with fine lines. The mouth opened, and the voice that came was the mother's. "Please, wait." I closed my eyes for a second, because looking makes you hear worse. "You can't come out," I said. "You don't get to come out anymore." It tilted its head. Behind it, far back, the chorus rose, echo on echo. I backed away and thumbed the detonator. The first charge went with a tight, angry boom that shoved the air out of the shaft. Pebbles stung my cheeks. The second charge burrowed itself into the crack, and then the roof folded, a slow-motion break like a wave falling in winter. Dust rolled out, and then thickened into paste in the night air. The grate jumped once, then lay still, half buried. The mouth of the hill, now a mouth filled with broken teeth. From inside came a sound like the lake emptying through a straw, long drawn, patient. I waited for a hand to push through. None came. I waited for the ring of white chalk to pulse. It didn't. The forest resumed its normal small noises. I wanted to believe I had done a clean thing. At the station, the Hendersons huddled by the radio. I called it in. A state trooper arrived with a medic in a truck at 2 a.m. We loaded the family, and they left without looking back. The boy had pressed his whistle into my palm before he climbed in. "For you," he whispered, as if the gift could pay off a debt. I didn't sleep. Dawn came thin and gray, and the lake looked like it had been scraped smooth by a giant hand. I walked the south shoreline again. The fish rings were gone. On a flat stone at the water's edge, 3 caddisflea cases lay arranged in a perfect triangle, each case coated in tiny white pebbles, their mouths facing the forest. I brushed them into the water, and they uncurled, swam, and vanished. That afternoon, a man came into the station. He wore a jacket older than me and a hat with a bead band. He said he was passing through, following water. We talked about the weather. He looked at my hands and said, "You've been in the earth." I sealed a hazard. I answered because that's the ranger word. Hazard. It covers a lot. He nodded. Hazard. He studied the map on the wall, the little excess where old mines slept. Then he tapped the table beside the orange case I had locked again. "You can close holes," he said. "Not unkind, but water remembers the way." I didn't ask how he knew. He left as quiet as he'd come. For the rest of my rotation, I woke to small noises. Once the whistle on the station peg gave a tiny, breathless chirp with no wind. Once I found a line of wet footprints on the porch, not human, not animal, the toes long and almost even in size. They dried too fast for the camera. On my last night, I wrote up my report, made it clinical because that's our other way of building walls. Inhuman vocalizations reported. Evidence of unlawful entry into decommissioned mine shaft. Cave-in executed to mitigate hazard. I didn't write about voices I knew that spoke from bodies that weren't their own. I didn't write that when I close my eyes now, I see chalk rings, perfect and patient. I didn't write that I can still hear the lake under the ground, moving, trying different paths. You might ask if I saved anyone. It's the only question that matters in the end. The Hendersons are alive. Others weren't there to save. Maybe they were at another mouth of the same body. Maybe they were deeper where even fire won't go. I tell myself I bought time. Time is a thin tool, but it's a tool. On my way out, I drove past the mine road and stopped. The pile of collapsed rock had settled into a long slouch. At the top of the rubble, someone had set 3 river stones in a little stack, not like a cairn you'd use to mark a trail, but like a message, A small throat cleared before a word. The stones were dusted white. I left them there. You don't answer everything that talks to you. I think about the stories I heard years back, the ones that made me roll my eyes because I had a degree and a rule book. Healers who went under, not to hide but to change, corrupted by something that wasn't evil so much as it was hungry and curious. Voices kept safe by water because water eats what you put in it and remakes it. Men who learned to speak all voices so the forest would always hear a friend, not a stranger. I think about the way the creatures stayed at the threshold, because a rule is still a rule even when your body forgets the shape of it. The preserve will close for winter soon. The lake will crust at the edges like a wound. Snow will lay over the ridges and quiet the roads. But the remembering will go on under the ice. One spring, low water will open a vent in a place I don't know yet. The listening will start again. There will be a new arrangement on a log, a trout at the base of a cedar, a child's toy on a stone with 3 white circles around it. Someone will hear 3 short blasts where there are no lungs. When my phone rings late and I can't explain why I know who it is before I answer, I hear 2 voices, layered and patient, and they do not threaten. They wait. They're the sound of water finding a way through rock, slow, steady, sure. I keep the boy's whistle on my keychain. Sometimes when the house is too quiet, I blow 3 short notes and listen for the answer. I tell myself that if I ever go back, I'll bring a crew, lights, a portable winch, a plan with signatures. And I know that when I reach a black mouth in the hillside and see the chalk rings, I'll stop because I will remember that I can only close holes. I can't close the world that made them. You asked for a scary story for a dark fall night. Here is mine. I sealed a cave that will open again. And I learned that some voices, once they find new throats, do not stop speaking. They learn your name, and they wait at the edge of your light, and they are not in a hurry. Neither is water. Neither is stone. The first time I noticed it, I didn't even think it was strange. A group of hikers came down from the ridge trail, moving in a single line like school children, their faces slack, their eyes unfocused. They walked right past me at the station without a nod, without a thank you or have a good day. Just silent, steady steps toward the parking lot. I chalked it up to exhaustion. Maybe they were dehydrated. Maybe they had a fight. But then it happened again. Different group, different trail, same behavior. Blank expressions, single file, not speaking. They didn't even look at each other. After 12 years in uniform, you learn to trust patterns. This was one. The reports began trickling in. Campers said their friends were acting strange, wandering off at night, staring at the ground for hours. Families left messages on our hotline. My son came back from the forest, and he's not the same. He listens, he nods, but he doesn't care anymore. I went out to the trails myself. The section in question was an old-growth part of the forest, untouched for centuries, the kind of place where the canopy knits so tightly the ground never dries. Mushrooms flourish there in pale clusters, white shelves, orange caps, strings of mycelium curling up tree trunks like veins. One afternoon, I followed a narrow spur off the main loop, just dirt beaten down by boots. That's where I saw them. 6 hikers, moving single file, their boots dragging just enough to leave furrows in the soil. They didn't speak. They didn't carry water or packs. At the front of the line was a woman with hair matted by sweat. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. I stepped out of the brush and called to them. "Hey, everything all right?" Not one of them answered. They kept walking, brushing past me, their pupils blown wide. When I grabbed the arm of the last man, his skin was damp, not with sweat, but with something slicker. He turned his head slowly, too slowly, and looked at me. Not through me, at me. And he smiled, just once like a reflex, then kept walking. They vanished deeper into the trees. That night, I couldn't shake the image. I lay awake, listening to the creaks of the ranger cabin. Around 3 in the morning, I heard footsteps outside. I went to the window. A line of figures walked across the clearing, 6, maybe 7, silent, in single file, their heads bent forward. They disappeared into the tree line, leaving no sound but the shuffle of their boots. I grabbed my light and followed. The deeper I went, the wetter it got. Moss soaked my knees, and every tree seemed furred with mushrooms. My light caught threads running between roots, white filaments almost glowing. They weren't scattered. They connected tree to tree like wires strung through the soil. And then I saw the growth. It rose from the ground like a swollen dome, taller than me, a pale mass of fungus breathing in the dark. From its surface sprouted human shapes, faces half-formed, limbs embedded in tissue, mouths open in silence. I saw one chest rise and fall, slow and steady, as if the body inside was still alive. The line of hikers approached it and stopped. The woman at the front touched the dome with her palm. Her fingers sank into the soft flesh. She leaned forward, pressing her face against it, and exhaled. A faint mist slipped from her lips into the surface. The dome pulsed. When she stepped back, the smile on her face was different, calm, satisfied. She turned to the others and gestured. They did the same, one by one, each pressing their faces against the growth, breathing into it, letting it breathe back. I wanted to run, but my boots were rooted. Something in the air made me lightheaded, like my lungs weren't mine anymore. I snapped myself out of it, stumbled back, and the white filaments underfoot seemed to curl toward me. Searching, I fired my flare into the air. The red light seared the clearing, and for the first time, the hikers reacted. They turned as one, their eyes reflecting red, their mouths slack with disappointment. Not anger, just hunger. I ran. Back at the station, I wrote my report in plain, clinical terms. Observed unusual group behavior. Possible contamination event. Area should be restricted pending further study. But the truth was harder to write. I'd seen the forest think. In the following weeks, I kept watch. More hikers came down blank-eyed. More campers reported strange behavior. But something else happened too. Wildlife changed. Deer stood on the trails, unafraid of me, their eyes clouded. Birds gathered on branches in perfect lines, all facing the same direction. And when storms rolled in, they always broke over the same patch of old growth, drenching the fungus in rain as though the weather itself had been bent. The forest was protecting its network, or serving it. I drove into town one weekend, thinking distance might clear my head. At a diner, I overheard 2 locals whispering about their cousin who went into the woods one person and came out another. They said he didn't fight, didn't argue, didn't drink like he used to. He just listened, always listened. That's when it hit me. The fungus didn't destroy people. It didn't erase them. It used them. They were still themselves, but softer, quieter, empty enough to let something else steer. One night, Jess, another ranger, came to me pale as paper. "They're at my door," she whispered. I followed her back to her cabin. Outside in the fog, a dozen figures stood in a line. All hikers we'd logged that week. They didn't knock. They didn't speak. They just stood, breathing in unison, their chests rising and falling together. When I stepped onto the porch, they turned their heads toward me, all at once. Their mouths opened, and they exhaled. The mist rolled across the clearing like a tide. My eyes watered. My throat burned. For a second, I saw myself standing among them, calm, collected, no fear, no duty, just part of something larger, something eternal. Jess screamed, and the vision shattered. The hikers turned back into the trees, single file, disappearing like smoke. We sat up the rest of the night, neither of us speaking. I thought about burning the grove, about calling in the Forest Service with backhoes and chemicals. But what then? The fungus wasn't just a growth. It was the forest mind. It stretched for miles underground. Killing it would kill the forest too. The pines, the deer, the very soil. That left me with two choices. Destroy everything to stop it, or let it grow, let it spread, and accept that it was only a matter of time before it reached the towns, the cities, the world. Some nights, I imagine walking into the line myself, breathing into the dome, feeling the slow pulse of belonging. No loneliness, no choices, no weight. Other nights, I sit with a box of matches and stare at the map, marking where the trails cut through the old growth. The fungus waits. It doesn't hurry, and I know sooner or later I'll have to decide, burn the forest to the ground or take my place in the line. When people ask me what the strangest thing I've seen as a ranger is, they expect a funny story about a bear stealing a cooler or tourists getting lost 20 feet off the trail. I wish that's all I had, but the truth is darker. The truth is, I've seen the forest move. It started with complaints. Campers swearing trees had shifted across trails overnight. I figured it was shadows, the way moonlight can trick the eye. But when I hiked out there myself, I found a spruce lying across the switchback, roots intact, no storm damage, no stump where it should have stood. It was as if the tree had simply picked up and laid down across the trail like a barrier. I rerouted the path and thought nothing more of it, until the first missing camper turned up. 2 college kids from Denver had been out for the weekend. When we found them 4 days later, they weren't dead. I almost wish they had been. They were fused into the earth, their arms and legs swallowed by wood, bark climbing their skin like ivy. Their mouths were open, their eyes rolling, but they couldn't speak. Their fingers twitched inside knots of oak. They were alive, and they were screaming without sound. We cut one free, at least we tried. The blade of the saw snapped when it touched the bark around her wrist. The wood bled sap, thick and red as blood. The girl convulsed, her chest heaving, and then went still. We had to leave them there. I've never forgiven myself for that. After that, I started digging through records. I found old reports, loggers in the 1800s writing about trees that moved back into place overnight after being cut. Accounts of men vanishing in the woods, their tools left behind, their camps untouched. The locals whispered about spirits, about the land taking back what was stolen. One night, while patrolling near the ridge, I heard it for myself. The groan of timber moving against timber, not in the wind, but in rhythm, deliberate. I swung my light and caught sight of a pine sliding its roots across the soil, slow as breathing, the ground splitting quietly around it. It wasn't falling, it was walking. I followed, heart hammering, until I reached a clearing. That's where I saw them, the tree shepherds. They were once human. You could still see it in the way their torsos bent, the hollows of their cheeks. But their limbs had become trunks, their fingers branches. Bark covered their skin in plates, their eyes were resin-glossed, and from their mouths hung moss-like beards. They moved with painful slowness, guiding saplings into neat rows, planting them into freshly dug holes. And the holes, they weren't just soil. They were pits lined with human remains, bones threaded with roots, ribs pierced by shoots of green. One of the shepherds looked at me. I don't know if it remembered its name, its life, but its eyes locked on mine with something like recognition. Its lips cracked open, splinters breaking as it whispered in a voice like creaking branches. "Grow." The others turned. A dozen of them, all in different stages of transformation. One still had human hair, black and matted, but bark climbed her jaw. Another had a leg fused entirely into a cedar trunk, dragging it forward with each step. They didn't chase me. They didn't need to. They just watched, patient as the forest itself. I ran back to the station and locked the door. But when I looked out the window, I saw saplings already sprouting in the dirt of the lot, small green shoots curling toward the cabin walls. In the days that followed, more campers went missing. Some we found half-merged, begging in hoarse whispers for help. Others we never saw again. And each time, new trees appeared on the ridges, healthy and tall overnight. I began to understand. The shepherds weren't killing at random. They were rebuilding, reclaiming land stripped bare by loggers a century ago. And the fuel they used wasn't just soil or water. It was us. I confronted one in the forest. It was dusk, the sky bleeding orange through the canopy. The shepherd stood rooted at the base of a hill, its arms sunk into the ground like stakes. I forced myself closer, axe in hand, though I knew steel was useless. Why? I asked it. Why them? Why us? Its jaw creaked as it answered. Because you took. Because you cut. Because the forest remembers. The sound shook me more than any scream could. It wasn't anger. It was certainty. I wanted to burn it to torch the whole grove. But I knew the truth. The forest was too wide, too old. I could kill 1,000 trees, and it would only plant more. Last week, I went back to the clearing. The shepherds were gone, but the saplings they'd planted were taller now, thick with leaves. In the center of the grove was something new, a line of young trees arranged in the shape of a town's grid. Streets of maple, houses of pine, as if the forest was already preparing to reclaim not just the wilderness, but the towns beyond. That night, I dreamed of my own hands hardening, bark cracking across my knuckles, roots splitting the floorboards of my cabin. I woke with dirt under my nails. I don't know how long I have before they come for me, before the forest decides my body will make good soil. But I know this, the tree shepherds aren't finished. They're moving closer each night. Every groan I hear in the dark isn't just wind. It's footsteps. One day soon, the forest won't stop at the tree line. It will march into the towns, the cities, the fields. It will reclaim every acre we ever stole. And when it does, there won't be screaming or fire. Just silence. Roots cracking through pavement. Branches rising where houses once stood. Families rooted in place, their arms outstretched as trunks, their mouths sealed with bark, their eyes forever watching. I'm a ranger. My job is to protect the land. But sometimes I wonder if that means protecting people from the forest or protecting the forest from us. Either way, the shepherds are patient, and patience is stronger than steel. The forest always wins in the end. I've spent most of my career patrolling the slot canyons of Utah, narrow, twisting cathedrals of stone carved by flash floods over centuries. Tourists come for the beauty, for the chance to squeeze between walls barely wide enough for shoulders. What they don't know is that those canyons carry voices, not just echoes, voices. It began with disappearances. 3 hikers went missing in the same week. We launched searches, combed the canyons with dogs, helicopters, the works. Then, just as sudden as they'd gone, the hikers reappeared on the trailheads, dazed, clothes torn, no memory of where they'd been. They weren't dehydrated, not injured, just wrong. At first, I thought they'd been shaken by exposure. But then one of them, a man from Arizona, began speaking fluent Shoshone during an interview with the sheriff. He had never studied it. Another, a young woman, started singing songs in a tongue older than English, her voice shaking the station windows like thunder. She didn't even realize she was doing it. I knew then something was hiding in the canyons, something older than all of us. One evening, I decided to hike out alone, against every regulation. The sun was falling, shadows stretching long and blue. I carried only a flashlight, a rope, and a recorder. The air in the slot was still, heavy with silence. But every step I took came back at me, not in echoes but in whispers. I stopped. "Ranger," the canyon said. I whipped the light around. The sandstone glowed red in the beam, but there was no one there. Only the thin seam of sky overhead, darkening by the minute. I kept going, heart hammering. Deeper in, the walls widened into a chamber. The floor was packed with sand. The air smelled of dust and something else, burnt sage, maybe. My light hit markings on the walls, spirals, handprints, hunting scenes etched into the rock. They pulsed as if still warm. And then the sound began. Not whispers, songs, layered voices rising from the walls themselves, filling the chamber with a chorus that seemed to come from every direction. Some sang, some cried, some shouted words I didn't understand. The noise pressed against my skull until I dropped to my knees. The recorder in my pocket clicked on by itself. Through the din, one voice separated from the rest. A woman's voice, soft and clear. "You carry our silence," she said. I looked up, and for a heartbeat I saw her. A figure painted in light on the canyon wall, hair braided, face painted in ash. She stepped out of the stone, her eyes empty yet knowing. My throat dried. "Where are the missing hikers?" I asked. My own voice shook. She lifted her arm and pointed deeper into the canyon. I followed, stumbling like I was being pulled. The chamber narrowed again, squeezing into a tunnel. At the end, I found another chamber, smaller, filled with shapes. People stood there in a circle, motionless, eyes shut. Their mouths moved, spilling out words in ancient languages. Among them were the 3 missing hikers. I tried to call to them, but their heads turned in perfect unison. Their eyes opened, and the voices of the dead poured out of their throats. Dozens, maybe hundreds, all speaking at once, languages colliding, grief and rage layered together. I staggered back. My light caught the walls. Carvings of faces, thousands of them, mouths open. The canyon wasn't just stone. It was memory. Every cry, every chant, every death knell spoken here had been trapped in the rock, alive, waiting for vessels. And now, the hikers were those vessels. The voices rushed toward me, and suddenly my head filled with words that weren't mine. Images flashed behind my eyes. Hunters chasing bison, children around a fire, women mourning their dead. For a second, I wasn't myself. I was all of them. I tore the recorder from my pocket and hurled it against the wall. The voices faltered. The hikers slumped to the sand, unconscious, the chamber silent except for the drip of water. I dragged them out one by one. It took hours. By the time dawn broke, we were all at the trailhead. They woke confused, not remembering the chamber, but when they spoke, their voices still carried the cadence of the old tongues. We told the press it was exhaustion, dehydration. Nothing more, but I know better. Since that night, I hear them too. Sometimes when I'm alone in my cabin, the walls tremble with songs I shouldn't know. I catch myself muttering words and languages no one alive speaks anymore. My reflection hums back at me, lips moving when mine are still. I don't know how much of me is still me. The canyon took something, or gave something, maybe both. The hikers have gone home, but I get reports. One of them, the Arizona man, now dreams in Shoshone, waking with tears on his face. The young woman records herself singing at night in voices that aren't her own. None of them remember the chamber, but the canyon does. I've stopped patrolling that section. Officially, it's closed due to rockfall risk. The truth is simpler. The canyon isn't safe for people anymore. It's alive with the dead. And sometimes when the wind threads through the slots just right, the voices ride it all the way to town. People wake in the night thinking their grandparents are calling them, or their ancestors are whispering in their ears. The echo chambers don't forget. They don't forgive. They only wait, stone mouths open, ready for the next voice to carry. And one day soon, I fear, those voices won't just borrow us. They'll keep us. The Smokies have a way of hiding things. Mist gathers in the hollows like breath, covering streams, cliffs, whole valleys you'd swear weren't there the day before. I've been a ranger here long enough to know when something doesn't add up. And nothing added up about the disappearances near Miller's Ridge. On paper, it was just hikers getting lost. But the ones who came back, well, they weren't the same. The first was a man named Peters. He stumbled out of the woods after being gone 3 weeks, his skin pallid, eyes unfocused. At first, I thought starvation had twisted him, but then I saw his arms. They were too long, joints shifted down, elbows bent the wrong way. His face looked stretched, jawline sloping like clay pulled in the wrong direction. Doctors wrote it off as malnutrition, a mental break. But I'd seen his ID photo. That man hadn't looked like that before. More cases followed. A teenage girl returned barefoot, her legs bowed, as if her bones had re-knit for some other purpose. She spoke with a rasp, her lungs whistling like they'd been remade. None of them remembered where they'd been. I started hiking Miller's Ridge myself, day after day, searching for signs. It was always the same. The mist gathered thicker than anywhere else, hanging low, moving against the wind. My compass needle twitched, sometimes spinning entirely. One morning, I followed a narrow game trail into the fog. It should have led back to the ridge, but it kept winding deeper. The air grew colder, my breath fogging. Then the mist opened, and I found it. A valley. It didn't appear on any map. No ranger records, no satellite images. It stretched wide, ringed by cliffs, carpeted with grass, so green it glowed. At the center was a pool, perfectly still, reflecting the sky, even though no sun cut through the mist. Shapes moved along the water's edge. At first I thought they were hikers, but their bodies wrong. Too tall, too thin, limbs bent at strange angles. Their movements were smooth, almost graceful, but their faces were wrong. Mouths wider, eyes too far apart. Yet in their expressions, I saw something horribly familiar. Memory. I crouched in the brush and listened. They spoke in whispers, but not in any language I knew. Still, a part of me understood. These weren't strangers. They'd been people once. Peters, the girl, maybe hundreds before them. Changed. As I watched, one of them knelt by the pool and placed its hands in the water. The surface rippled, and another figure emerged. Not from beneath, but from the water itself, like the pool was giving birth. The new figure was half-formed, its bones stretching as if invisible hands were pulling it into shape. Its screams echoed against the cliffs until one of the taller creatures touched its head, soothing it, whispering. That's when I realized this wasn't a curse. It was a process, a transformation. The mist thickened around me, and I felt it pressing against my skin. My arms tingled. My bones ached like they wanted to bend. I stumbled back, covering my mouth with my sleeve. But before I turned to flee, one of them looked up. Its eyes locked on mine, and in those eyes I saw a recognition. Not as predator to prey, as kin. I bolted. The forest twisted around me, trails vanishing, landmarks rearranged. The mist followed, brushing against my face with fingers of damp air. When I finally broke free onto the ridge, I collapsed, lungs burning. My arms still tingled, as if something inside had been stirred awake. Back at the station, I told no one. What would I say? That there's a valley full of half-human creatures rewriting our bones? That the mist itself is alive, pulling us in? But the disappearances kept happening, and the ones who returned grew stranger. I started keeping notes, longer strides, altered rib cages, even sharper senses. One girl described hearing insects crawling inside trees. Another said she could smell storms days away. They weren't sick. They were adapting. Last week, I returned to the valley at dawn. The mist opened willingly this time, as if it knew me. At the pool, a figure approached. Its body was twisted, but its face, God help me, its face was still human enough for me to know it had once been Ranger Ellis, my old partner who vanished 5 years back. He smiled, a crooked stretch of lips. "It's better," he whispered, his voice like wind through reeds. "We can live when you can't. We can survive what's coming." I couldn't speak. My throat closed. He reached out a hand, fingers too long, joints backward, palm glowing faintly with veins of light. "Join us," he said. I ran, but his words stayed. What if he was right? The valley isn't killing them. It's preparing them, turning people into something built for a world we can't endure. What if the mist isn't a trap, but a doorway? I sit in my cabin now, writing this, my arms still aching from that day. Some mornings, my fingers feel stiff, like they want to bend the wrong way. I wake gasping, lungs wheezing, air whistling through me like a flute. I know I'll go back, not because I want to, because I can feel the valley calling, pulling me toward that pool where the mist never lifts. One day soon, I'll vanish from the logs like the others. They'll say the ranger went missing near Miller's Ridge. Maybe weeks later, I'll stumble back out, changed. Or maybe I'll stay in the valley forever, another guardian of whatever future it's building. The Smokies hide many things. Some are meant to stay hidden. Others, they're waiting to be found. And some, I fear, are waiting to find us. When I took the Water Patrol assignment up in Minnesota's Boundary Waters, I thought it would be quiet work. Canoe checks, fishing licenses, the occasional lost camper. The lakes up here stretch forever. Thousands of them, all stitched together by narrow channels. Beautiful, yes, but beauty hides things. I learned that fast. It started with a report from a father who came into the ranger station white as ash. He said his teenage daughter had been taken by the water. Not drowned, taken. When I pressed him, he stammered out something about how she'd been looking at her reflection in the lake for hours, then slipped under without a splash. They found her minutes later, walking calmly back to camp, dry as a bone. She insisted she'd never gone in, but the father swore the girl who came out wasn't his daughter. I wrote it off as shock, until more stories piled in. Campers said their reflections didn't match their movements. A man brushing his teeth by the shore saw his mirrored self smile before he did. A woman said her reflection kept brushing her hair long after she'd stopped. Children reported playing with the kids in the water, who knew their names before they'd spoken. I decided to check it myself. One evening, just before sunset, I paddled to a narrow lake with glassy water. The surface was so still it looked like black stone. I leaned over the canoe, expecting the usual, my tired face, the brim of my hat. But the man looking back at me smiled before I did. I jerked upright, nearly capsizing. My reflection's grin lingered a second too long, then flattened to match my shock. I rowed back hard, my skin crawling. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw that delayed smile. The next morning, I went back with a camera. I crouched at the waterline, filming as I waved. The reflection waved with me. Then, after I lowered my hand, the reflection kept waving. Slow, mocking. When I replayed the footage later, the reflection's hand stopped the exact moment mine did. Perfect sync. The camera saw what my eyes couldn't. That's when I understood. The water shows you what you want to see, but beneath it, something else is watching. 2 weeks later, a whole family vanished from their campsite. Their canoe drifted empty in the channel. No signs of struggle. 3 days after that, the family showed up in town, calm, polite, acting normal. But neighbors whispered they weren't the same. They didn't argue, didn't laugh the way they used to. Their dog wouldn't go near them. I drove out to see them. The mother smiled politely, but too still, like her skin didn't fit right. The father shook my hand, his grip too cold. The children stared without blinking, their eyes dark like deep water. On the drive back, my radio crackled with a sound I'll never forget. My own voice saying my name, repeating it over and over like a lure. I stopped patrolling alone after that. One evening, Jess, another ranger, confessed she'd seen her own reflection climb out of the lake. She'd been washing her face at dawn when the water rose in the shape of her, dripping and silent, standing on the surface before sliding back under. She swore it touched her shoulder before it sank. The bruise was still there, shaped like a hand. That was when I knew this wasn't just hallucination. Something lived under the surface, something that could mimic us down to the breath. And it wanted out. I started researching. Old Ojibwe stories spoke of the second people, water spirits who learned faces like masks. Some tales said they were harmless. Others warned that once a reflection learned your name, it could step into your life while you drowned beneath the surface, screaming where no one could hear. The drownings on record suddenly looked different to me. Not accidents, replacements. The final proof came 2 months ago. I was patrolling a cluster of islands at dusk when I heard voices across the water, children laughing. I paddled toward the sound. On a rocky shore, I saw 3 figures, their backs turned, splashing at the edge. They looked like kids. I called out. They froze, then turned. Their faces were pale copies of children I'd seen on missing posters weeks earlier. Mouths too wide, eyes too flat. They grinned, all at once, and sank straight into the water. Not a ripple. The lake went still. My reflection in the water grinned back at me. Then it climbed upward. It didn't break the surface. It rose through it, as if the lake itself had peeled off my skin and stood it up. My double stared at me, water dripping from its hair, its eyes colder than mine had ever been. I fired my flare gun. The light seared across the water, and the thing collapsed back into the lake. But not before it spoke. Soon, it whispered in my own voice. I don't patrol those lakes anymore, but I know the replacements are spreading. In town, I see neighbors who move just a little too stiffly. People who smile at the wrong time. Whole families that don't argue in diners, don't laugh in church. And always, their reflections match them perfectly. Too perfectly. Sometimes late at night, I dream of drowning. Not the panic of lungs filling, but the calm of slipping under and opening my eyes to see a whole city of people waiting. Streets of mirrors, houses of water, faces that are mine and not mine. They welcome me, arms outstretched, inviting me to join them. And when I wake, the mirror above the sink shows me smiling a second too late. I know now what they want. They want all of us. One day soon, the reflections won't wait for us to lean over the lake. They'll walk into our world and stay. And no one will notice the difference until it's too late. Because the replacements are colder, smarter, patient, and the water never forgets a face. I've walked the Pacific Northwest forest for years, and they've always felt alive. Towering cedars, moss thick as carpets, streams whispering through the undergrowth. But last fall, I learned that alive didn't just mean trees and animals. It meant something else, something waiting. The first report came from a frantic mother. Her little boy had wandered off the trail near Cedar Hollow. When search crews found him 3 days later, he was calm, smiling even. He wasn't injured, wasn't dehydrated, but his eyes were different, flat, distant, as though he was listening to something we couldn't hear. Doctors said trauma, but when I visited him in the hospital, he looked me dead in the eye and whispered, "We don't need names anymore. We are one." Then he laughed, not like a child, but like a chorus. I wrote it off as shock, until it happened again. Children went missing every few weeks, only to return days later. Always alive, always changed. They spoke less, but when they did, their words matched, phrases repeated between them, sometimes at the same time. They'd wander off again, no matter how closely they were watched, always heading deeper into the old growth, where the forest floor was littered with fallen logs slick with mushrooms. I decided to investigate. One rainy morning, I followed a set of small footprints past the marked trail. The air was thick, damp enough to taste. The prints led to a rotting cedar, trunk bigger than a truck. It had split open, its interior glowing faintly with pale threads of fungus. And there, pressed against the wood, were handprints, tiny dozens of them, burned into the damp rot. I crouched low and heard it. A faint hum, like wind through hollow pipes. But it wasn't wind. It was voices, layered, whispering from inside the log. My skin crawled. That night, I couldn't sleep. My cabin echoed with phantom sounds, children giggling, then falling silent all at once. When I stepped outside, the forest was still, yet I could swear eyes blinked from the shadows between the trunks. The next day, I found them. It was deep in the reserve, where sunlight never touched the ground. A clearing ringed with colossal stumps. In the center stood a hollowed-out tree, massive, its insides crawling with glowing fungus. And around it, children, a dozen, maybe more. Their clothes were ragged, their skin pale, but they didn't look sick. They looked content. They moved together, every step in sync, as if one mind guided them. Their eyes glowed faintly in the half-light, milky with spores. At the base of the hollow tree sat a figure larger than the rest. At first, I thought it was a child too, until I saw its face. Or what was left of it. Fungal plates had replaced skin, its mouth a cracked, seam-spilling mist. But behind the growth, I glimpsed features frozen in time. It wasn't a child anymore. It was something older, something that had been waiting. And I realized I was looking at the first, the original victim. Reports in the archives spoke of a boy who vanished in the 1950s, never found. He would have been an old man by now, but here he was, ageless, remade by the organism living inside him. He, or it, spoke, though the voice didn't come from his mouth. It came from all the children at once. We are the forest. We are the future. The words vibrated through the soil, through my bones. I stumbled back, but the children didn't follow. They only watched, heads tilting in perfect unison. I ran until my lungs burned. Back at the station, I filed no report. What would I write? That the forest was birthing a hive of spore-born children? That humanity itself was being rewritten in hollow trees? But the evidence kept piling up. Parents came to me begging, saying their kids had started sleepwalking, whispering in voices not their own. Some carried dirt under their fingernails, rich with mycelium. Others disappeared into the woods again, not to return. And every time I hiked near that clearing, I saw more saplings sprouting from the earth. Not normal saplings. They grew in rows, too neat, as if planted by careful hands. I tried once to burn the hollow tree. I carried fuel, matches, but when I approached, a dozen children stood shoulder to shoulder in front of it, silent, their eyes glowing. They didn't move. They didn't threaten. They simply waited. My hand shook so badly I dropped the matchbox. I couldn't strike it. I couldn't make myself. The organism knows fear. It knows patience. It knows how to protect itself. Weeks later, I woke in the night to hear a voice outside my cabin. A child's voice, whispering my name. I opened the door and saw footprints in the mud leading into the forest. I didn't follow. I knew where they went. And now I feel it too. A pressure behind my eyes. A hum in my skull. Sometimes when I breathe, the air tastes of earth and fungus. as if the spores have already taken root. I don't know how long I have before I join them, but I know this. The spore children aren't just lost kids anymore. They're scouts, a colony growing, spreading. One day, they'll stop luring children. They'll come for all of us. And when they do, we won't even fight. We'll walk into the forest smiling, our hands brushing the logs, our lungs filling with spores. We'll become part of something larger, something endless. And humanity will end, not with fire, not with war, but with quiet laughter echoing from the hollow trees. The Montana Badlands are full of bones. Dinosaur fossils, bison remains, even the burial sites of tribes who lived and died long before the first surveyors carved lines on a map. Out there, the land feels stripped bare, nothing but stone and sun and silence. But bones keep secrets, and sometimes they don't stay buried. It started with an archaeology team. They set up camp near Raven's Bluff, where sandstone cliffs crumble into gullies. They were supposed to be cataloging fossil beds. After 3 days, their radio went silent. When we finally found them, I wished we hadn't. They were alive. Technically, one man stumbled toward us across the flats. At first, I thought he was naked, but then I saw what he'd become. His skin was gone, peeled away like old bark. His body was nothing but bones lashed together with threads of sinew that weren't his own. And yet his skull turned, his jaw clicked, and he whispered, "Help me." We tried to carry him out, but his body began to crumble in our arms, vertebrae snapping loose like beads on a string. He screamed until his jaw split away, and then there was only silence. We should have left then. We didn't. That night, we made camp by the trucks. Around midnight, the howling started. Not coyotes, this was deeper, like flutes made from arrow. Shapes moved along the ridge, their limbs long, their bodies patchworks of skeletons threaded together. One had a human skull, another a deer's, another the jaw of something prehistoric. They clattered as they walked, bone against bone. They came closer, and I saw their faces, if you could call them that. Sockets where eyes should be, some filled with glowing resin, some empty. One raised a hand, nothing but phalanges bound with sinew, and pointed at us. We fired into them. Bullets cracked ribs, shattered femurs. But the pieces didn't fall. The bones crawled back, reassembling themselves with strands of muscle that weren't muscle at all, slick cords twisting like worms. We fled in the dark. When I returned the next morning with reinforcements, the camp was gone. Not destroyed. Gone. The tents, the equipment, even the tire ruts erased. But in the dust lay piles of bones, cleaned to gleaming white, arranged in patterns. Circles, spirals, even cages. And inside one of those cages, we found Dr. Willis. He was still alive, his voice hoarse, his body half stripped. The flesh of his arms was gone, replaced by the bones of another animal. Longer, heavier. They'd been grafted into him. His eyes darted, wide with terror. "They're weaving us," he croaked, "taking us apart, making us stronger." We tried to free him, but his bones locked against the cage, as if he'd become part of it. He begged for death. We gave it to him. I still hear the shot in my dreams. I began researching, desperate for answers. Tribal history spoke of a burial cult, centuries old, that believed death wasn't an end but a resource. They said the cultists learned how to weave spirits into new bodies by rearranging bones, trading skeletons like garments. They called themselves the Bone Weavers. I thought it was myth, but the Badlands are full of myths wearing flesh. Or bone. 2 weeks later, another team went missing. This time, when we searched, we found tunnels carved into the cliffs. Caves lined with ribs like arches, spines nailed to walls as decorations. The air stank of blood and dust. Inside, we heard voices. Familiar voices. "Ranger," they called. My name, in the tone of my brother who died years ago. My knees buckled. Shapes moved in the dark. Bone figures, dozens of them. Some were tall, built from elk and human skeletons lashed together. Others were small, crawling, their jaws clacking like teeth chattering in cold. One approached me slowly. Its skull was human, cracked down the center. The voice that came from it was Willis's. "Join us," it whispered. "We are endless. We are strong. The flesh fails, but the bone remembers." I raised my rifle, but the sight blurred. My hand shook so badly the barrel rattled. Behind Willis's skull, I saw others, faces of colleagues, men and women I'd worked with, all staring, their consciousness still alive in those twisted forms. And they begged, not to be saved, not to be freed. They begged for death. I ran. My team didn't. I still don't know if they were taken or if they chose to stay. Since that day, I haven't gone back into the tunnels. But I don't need to. I've seen their work outside. Bones left in fields, arranged like nets. Cattle skeletons picked clean in hours. Birds flying with wings patched from different species. And sometimes at night, I feel it in myself. A twinge in my ribs, a pressure in my knees, as though my bones are loosening, ready to be traded. I know the bone weavers are patient. They don't just want bodies. They want memories, voices, identities. They keep people alive in those cages of bone, stripping them piece by piece, not for cruelty, but for use. To them, death is waste, and we are raw material. When the wind howls through the Badlands, it carries more than dust. It carries the sound of bone flutes, hollow music threading the night. One day, when we're gone, the Badlands won't be empty. They'll walk with figures built from everything we were, everything we killed, everything we left behind. The bone weavers will endure, because bone endures. And maybe one day, you'll hear that music in your own bones calling you home.